That evening, I carefully positioned my phone on the bookshelf across from my bed. The camera was angled perfectly to capture the room, including the door. I set it to record and placed a pillow over the screen, leaving just enough space for the lens. The red recording dot was barely visible. My plan was simple: go to sleep and hope the phone caught anything unusual. As I lay under the covers, my mind refused to quiet down. Every sound, every creak of the house settling felt amplified, like a warning. The idea of Harry sneaking into my room again made my skin crawl. Was he just watching? Or was there something darker I hadn't yet uncovered? I gripped the edge of my blanket tightly, as though it could shield me from whatever might come. Hours passed, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. Suddenly, I woke with a start. The faint glow of the moon streamed through the curtains, casting eerie shadows across the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear footsteps, breathing, anything. But there was only silence. I glanced at my phone on the bookshelf, its tiny light still blinking. It was still recording. For a moment, I wondered if I was being ridiculous. Maybe Harry hadn't done anything. Maybe I had let my imagination spiral out of control. But then I heard it. The doorknob turned. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The lock held, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone was trying to get in. My mind screamed at me to move, to make a noise, to do something, but my body refused to cooperate. Instead, I lay there, paralyzed, as the doorknob jiggled again, more insistently this time. "Harry," I whispered into the darkness, my voice barely audible. The doorknob stopped moving. The silence that followed was deafening. My eyes stayed fixed on the door, my ears straining for any sign of movement. And then, finally, the sound of retreating footsteps. Whoever it was, though I had no doubt it was him. He was gone. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't sleep. My phone continued to record, capturing the darkness of my room and the faint sound of my panicked breathing. When the first light of dawn broke, I sat up and grabbed the phone, my hands shaking. I stopped the recording and scrolled to the footage. My heart raced as I fast-forwarded through the hours of stillness, searching for the moment the doorknob turned. There it was. My blood ran cold as I watched the shadow move in front of the door. It was him. His profile was clear, even in the dim light. But what chilled me to the core was what happened next. Instead of walking away immediately, he stood there. Just stood there. For minutes. Listening? Thinking? I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I couldn't stay silent any longer. At breakfast, I was barely able to look at him. Harry greeted me with his usual, cheerful tone, pouring himself a cup of coffee like he didn't spend last night lurking outside my room. My mom was chatting about her weekend plans, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I excused myself, mumbling something about homework, and retreated to my room. My phone buzzed. A message from Harry. "We need to talk." Alone. My stomach dropped. How did he know? Did he see the camera? Was he threatening me? My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure if I should even respond. Every fiber of my being told me to ignore it, to run, to tell someone, but I couldn't. Something about his message felt ominous, like he was daring me to confront him. I finally typed, "What do you want?" and hit send. His reply came almost instantly. "Come to the garage." No. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. The garage? It was the one place in the house no one ever went unless they had to. My mom hated the clutter, and Harry seemed to treat it like his personal sanctuary. The idea of being alone with him there made my skin crawl. But I needed answers. I needed to know what he wanted and why he was doing this. Maybe, just maybe, I could get him to admit something or catch him slipping up. I grabbed my phone, made sure the video recording app was ready to go, and slipped it into my pocket. My hands trembled as I turned the doorknob and stepped into the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards feel like a shout. The walk to the garage felt like it stretched forever. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My reflection in the glass window looked pale, almost ghostly. I pushed the door open. Harry was there, standing in the middle of the room. The dim light of a single bulb swung overhead, casting unsettling shadows across his face. He looked calm, too calm, like he had rehearsed this moment. "You've been acting strange," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I swallowed hard. "I could ask you the same thing." He tilted his head, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the video. "I know what you've been doing, Harry. I have proof." For the first time, his calm demeanor cracked. His eyes narrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "Proof of what?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribcage. "The photos. The recordings. You were in my room." His expression darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I did. And as I stood there, staring into the eyes of the man who had violated my trust, I realized something even more horrifying. This wasn't just about me. It was about control, about power, and about how far he was willing to go to keep his secrets hidden. "I'm not scared of you," I lied, my voice shaking. "And I'm not letting this go." His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Be careful, Clara. You don't want to make enemies in your own house." I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. This wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. That day felt endless. Every movement Harry made, every word he spoke, sent a chill down my spine. Was he aware that I suspected something? Did he sense my growing unease? "Julia, you seem lost in thought today," Harry said, his voice calm as we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile meant to disarm, to make you question your own instincts. "I'm just tired," I muttered, avoiding eye contact. My hands trembled slightly as I rinsed a glass, trying to act casual. He leaned against the counter, studying me. "You've been acting differently lately. Is something bothering you?" I froze for a moment before forcing a weak smile. "No, everything's fine." But everything was far from fine. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and fear. I avoided him whenever possible, retreating to my room under the pretense of studying. Harry noticed. I could see it in the way his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, as if he was trying to read my thoughts. That night, I made a decision. I left my bedroom door slightly ajar, just enough to see if he would come in. My phone was tucked beneath my pillow, its camera pointed toward the doorway. If he tried anything, I would have proof. The minutes crawled by as I lay in bed, staring at the faint glow of the hallway light filtering into my room. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid it would give me away. I focused on the sounds of the house, the creaks of the wooden floor, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional sigh of the wind outside. But then, something else. Footsteps. My breath caught in my throat. They were slow and deliberate, growing louder as they approached my room. I gripped my phone tightly, my thumb hovering over the record button. The shadow appeared first, stretching across the floor. Then, the figure stepped into view. It was Harry. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his silhouette outlined by the dim hallway light. My pulse raced as I watched him, frozen in place. His head tilted slightly, as if he was listening for any sign that I was awake. My eyes remained shut just enough to give the illusion of sleep, but I could still see him through the slits. And then he took a step forward. The next morning, I felt like a zombie. Sleep had been impossible after what happened. Harry hadn't done anything beyond standing there, watching me, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I reviewed the footage on my phone, but it was too dark to make out much. Still, the shadowy figure hovering at the doorway was undeniable proof that he had been there. I debated showing the video to my mom, but my gut told me it wouldn't make a difference. She trusted Harry completely. Confronting him directly felt even riskier. He was cunning, always one step ahead, and I couldn't afford to let him know I was onto him. As the day wore on, Harry's behavior became increasingly unsettling. He would appear out of nowhere, standing silently in the doorway while I worked on my laptop or sitting too close on the couch when my mom wasn't around. Each time, he acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary, but the intensity in his eyes told a different story. That evening, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. I think Julia's been stressed lately, Harry said to my mom, his tone dripping with concern. Maybe we should plan a family outing to help her relax. My mom laughed softly. She's a teenager, Harry. It's probably just school. No, he insisted, his voice lower now. It's something else. I can feel it. My heart sank. He was trying to plant seeds of doubt to make me seem irrational. It was a subtle manipulation, but it worked. My mom's expression shifted, a flicker of worry crossing her face. I'll talk to her, she said finally. Thanks for noticing, Harry. That was the moment I realized I was on my own. If I wanted to stop him, I had to do it myself. That night, I decided to change my strategy. Instead of waiting for him to come to me, I would confront him on my terms. I set up my phone in the living room, carefully hiding it among the books on the shelf. The microphone was angled to pick up every word. If Harry wanted to play games, I was ready. As I sat on the couch pretending to read, I felt his presence before I saw him. He entered the room, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I closed my book and looked up at him. "About what?" "You know what," he said, taking a seat across from me. His eyes bore into mine, challenging me to speak first. I didn't flinch. "If you have something to say, Harry, just say it." His lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I think you've misunderstood a lot of things, Julia. Maybe it's time we clear the air." I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. Misunderstood? Like what? The photos? The standing in my doorway at night? For the first time, he seemed taken aback. It was only for a split second, but it was enough. I had caught him off guard. "You've been imagining things," he said finally, his tone dismissive. "It's not healthy to let your mind run wild." "Don't gaslight me," I shot back, my voice steady. "I know what I saw. And I have proof." His expression darkened. "You don't want to do this, Julia." "Do what?" I challenged, my heart pounding. "Tell the truth." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. Finally, he stood and smoothed his shirt. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said quietly. "Be careful, Julia." The night stretched on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Harry wasn't going to back down, and neither was I. Whatever his plan was, I was determined to uncover it, even if it meant risking everything. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, every muscle in my body tense. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would betray me. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound echo like a scream. Then I heard it, a faint creak of the floorboards. Through the narrow crack in the door, I saw it. A shadow, moving closer, deliberate and slow. Very. I held my breath, barely daring to blink. He stepped into the room, his silhouette faintly illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the curtains. He stopped by my bed, standing so still it was as if time had frozen. My skin prickled with dread, and I fought the instinct to flinch. He leaned slightly closer, and I could feel the weight of his gaze. Every second stretched into an eternity. My fists clenched under the blanket, and I prayed he wouldn't notice the tension in my body. After what felt like forever, he straightened and left the room, his footsteps retreating into the hallway. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My mind raced with a storm of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. The events of the past few days were no longer just suspicions, they were real. Harry had crossed a line, and now there was no denying it. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, clutching my coffee cup like it was a lifeline. Harry entered the room, his usual calm demeanor unchanged. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth. "You look like you didn't sleep well." I forced a small smile, avoiding his gaze. "Just a rough night." He nodded, his expression neutral, but there was a glint in his eyes that made my stomach churn. He knew. He knew I was onto him. Determined to understand the full extent of what was happening, I decided to investigate. While Harry and Mom were out running errands, I went to his study. My hands trembled as I opened drawers, sifted through papers, and checked his computer. At first, I found nothing unusual, just receipts, work documents, and harmless photos. But then, in a hidden folder on his desktop, I found it. Pictures. Of me. They weren't just from the past few days. Some were months old. My heart dropped as I scrolled through them, each image more invasive than the last. He had been watching me for a long time. That evening, Harry acted like nothing had changed. He laughed at the dinner table, joked with Mom, and even offered to do the dishes. The normalcy felt suffocating, like a mask barely concealing something sinister. I couldn't bring myself to eat. Every bite felt like it would choke me. I excused myself early and went back to my room, locking the door behind me. My chest heaved as I tried to process what I had seen. What should I do? Confront him? Tell Mom? Go to the police? None of the options felt safe. Harry was too calculated, too careful. If I made a wrong move, he could turn it all against me. That night, I set up my phone again, this time with a clearer view of the room. I needed undeniable proof, something so damning that no one could dismiss it. As I lay there, pretending to sleep, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The fear was overwhelming, but so was the determination. I couldn't let him get away with this. Then, just as I was starting to doubt he would show, I heard it again. The soft creak of the floor. The shadow appeared, sliding into the room like a predator stalking its prey. He moved closer this time, hovering over me for what felt like an eternity. My pulse raced, but I kept my breathing steady, my body still. The phone recorded everything. Finally, he retreated, and I let out a shaky breath. This was it. I had what I needed. But as I reviewed the footage the next morning, a chilling realization hit me. Harry wasn't just watching me. He was toying with me, testing me. And now I had to figure out my next move before he made his. I knew I had to tell Mom, but the thought filled me with dread. What if she didn't believe me? What if she sided with him? Harry's behavior had shifted subtly but noticeably. He watched me more closely, his casual comments laced with an undertone I couldn't ignore. "You've been awfully quiet lately, Julia," he remarked during dinner, his tone light, but his eyes unwavering. "Anything on your mind?" I froze mid-bite, feeling his gaze burn into me. "Just school stuff," I mumbled, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Later that night, I tried to approach Mom indirectly. Sitting on the couch beside her, I hesitated before speaking. "Mom," I began cautiously, "have you ever felt like someone wasn't who they seemed?" She glanced up from her book, looking puzzled. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "I mean, do you ever think Harry acts strange?" Her laughter caught me off guard. "Strange? Julia, what are you talking about? Harry's been nothing but wonderful to us." I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. She didn't see it. She didn't feel the unease that wrapped around me like a vice every time he was near. The next morning, Harry cornered me in the kitchen. His presence filled the small space, making it hard to breathe. "Julia," he said, leaning against the counter, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You've been acting differently. Is something bothering you?" My hands clenched around the edge of the sink, my back to him. "No," I said quickly, too quickly. He stepped closer. I could feel the heat of him behind me, his shadow stretching over mine. "If there's something you want to talk about, you can always come to me. You know that, right?" My heart raced, but I nodded, forcing myself to stay composed. "Of course." When he finally left the room, I exhaled shakily, gripping the counter for support. He knew. He was testing me, pushing me to see how much I understood. That evening, I decided to confront Mom more directly. I waited until Harry had gone to his study and approached her in the living room. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I said, my voice trembling. She looked up, her expression shifting from concern to irritation as I recounted what I'd found. I showed her the photos I'd uncovered, the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. But instead of the outrage I expected, her face hardened. "Julia, this isn't funny," she said, shaking her head. "How could you accuse Harry of something like this?" "Mom, I'm not lying," I insisted, tears welling up in my eyes. "He's been watching me. There are pictures." "Enough," she snapped, her voice rising. "I don't know where you got these, but Harry would never do something like that. You're confused. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. She didn't believe me. She wouldn't even consider it. I retreated to my room, devastated. How could she not see it? How could she defend him so blindly? The walls felt like they were closing in, and for the first time, I truly felt alone. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, determination replaced my despair. If Mom wouldn't help, I'd handle this myself. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I reviewed my evidence, carefully organizing it into a file. Photos, timestamps, details, anything that could prove the truth. I even considered taking it to the police, but fear held me back. What if it wasn't enough? What if Harry's found out? The tension in the house was unbearable over the next few days. Harry's behavior became more intrusive, his comments more pointed. "Is everything okay, Julia?" he asked one evening, his voice dripping with false concern. "You seem distracted." I avoided his gaze, muttering something incoherent before retreating to my room. But as the days passed, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. Harry was growing bolder, and I couldn't predict what he might do next. That night, I made my decision. I'd confront him directly. I needed answers. I needed to see his reaction. As I stood outside his study, my heart pounded in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see him sitting at his desk, oblivious to my presence. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had, and stepped inside. The house felt different that night. Mom wasn't home. She'd left to visit her sister, and the silence was heavy, almost oppressive. I tried to distract myself, scrolling through my phone, but every creak of the floorboards sent chills up my spine. I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. Then came the knock. "Julia." Harry's voice called from the other side of my bedroom door, low and deliberate. "Can we talk?" My heart pounded. Why now? Why did he always wait until we were alone? I stayed silent, hoping he'd go away. "I know you're awake," he continued, his tone softer now. "I just want to talk, that's all." I swallowed hard. "What do you want, Harry?" My voice trembled, betraying my fear. There was a pause. "We can't keep living like this," he said finally. "It's not good for any of us." His words were unsettling, and before I could stop myself, I got up and unlocked the door. I only meant to open it slightly, but Harry pushed it open and stepped inside, his towering frame filling the small room. "We need to be honest with each other," he said, his voice calm but insistent. "You've been acting distant, and I know why." "Do you?" I asked, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Because I don't think you do." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were trying to read my thoughts. "You found the pictures, didn't you?" The air left my lungs. So he knew. He wasn't even going to deny it. "What were you doing with them?" I demanded, my voice rising. "They were what you think," he said quickly, his tone defensive. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Julia." You what?" I snapped, stepping back as he moved closer. "You were watching me sleep, Harry. How is that not wrong?" He hesitated, and for the first time, I saw something close to shame flicker across his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "I was just checking on you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Making sure you were safe." "Safe?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You think sneaking into my room and taking pictures of me is keeping me safe?" Before he could respond, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Mom was home. "Julia?" "Harry." Mom's voice called out from the hallway. The tension in the room snapped like a rubber band. Harry straightened, and I took the opportunity to dart past him into the hall. "Mom." I called out, my voice shaking. She turned toward me, her face creased with concern. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between me and Harry, who was now standing awkwardly behind me. I hesitated for only a moment before blurting out, "He's been coming into my room at night. He took pictures of me while I was sleeping." Mom's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she seemed frozen. Then she turned to Harry, her expression hardening. "Is this true?" Harry stammered, his usual composure slipping. "She's confused," he said quickly. "She's been stressed lately, imagining things." "Don't lie to me," Mom snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. For a moment, I thought Harry might try to deny it again, but then his shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh. "It's not what it seems," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. "Pack your things and get out," Mom said firmly, her voice trembling with anger. "You're not welcome here anymore." I watched as Harry left the room, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at me again. Later, as Mom and I sat in the kitchen, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Julia," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have seen the signs." "It's not your fault," I said, though the words felt hollow. For a while, we sat in silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. That night, as I lay in bed, I wanted to believe it was over. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house made my heart race, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Harry's shadow still lingered. Some nights, I wake up with that same sensation, the feeling of being watched. And sometimes I wonder if it's just my imagination, or if he's still out there, waiting. The end. Or is it? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your story in the comments.